Noah's flood. In the evolutionary chart, we don't really know what it was because they don't have anything in their geologic column to say what it was. But they know that there was one because DNA barcoding doesn't lie, and it's 99.999% accurate. So therefore, why is there genetic variation between a pongo or orangutan and a gorilla and a chimpanzee and a human? Well, if they all came through that bottleneck at exactly the same time, then there has to be a reason for it. And that reason is generation time. And so with a fast mutation rate, you're going to find that the one that have the fastest generation time will have more mutation differences. And therefore, that's how phylogenetic charts are built, because they believe genetic diversity determines what species is older, but it's really generational time. The pongo, or on the far right, the orangutan, has a generation time of 11 years, and a gorilla has one of 20 years. So therefore, the pongo will look much older than every other one that you're looking at on your screen. So therefore, evolutionarily wise, they believe that that came first, which now we know that is not true, because that door you see in the background, all of them came through it at the exact same time, because that was the bottleneck. Whether or not you believe it was Noah's flood or a volcano or whatever, it doesn't matter, because it existed and it happened to all life. And therefore, their phylogenetic trees are garbage and mean nothing. Also, using that mutation rate, using the CO1 gene and how fast mutations are, we can show that the genetic boundary is right there. And it's somewhere around, what is that? 22? Yes, the dividing line is 22 mutations. It separates humans from everything else. And we know that based on the mutation rate. So drawing the chart isn't just through this anymore, which is baraminology. This is the physical differences. That's by looking at morphology like this. This is what most people want to do, because they can go to the fossil record, they can look at the different bone structures, and they can say, well, how many different morphological features are there? This guy wants us to believe that we share more with chimpanzees and primates than cats do with other cats. Unfortunately for him, nothing could be further from the truth. So what we can do is, I'm sorry, I have to upload each of these photos that I'm showing you. What we can do is we can ask the experts. We can say, well, how many physical differences are there between different cats? And they admit that house cats and big cats are nearly identical. Brain size is also nearly identical in structure, even despite the size. So taking a small house cat and enlarging it to the size of a lion would equate to the exact same result. So when looking at a skeleton, a lion is basically just a scaled up cat. So you talk about utter failure when it comes to arguments. The one thing he said was that cats have more differences than humans do to chimps couldn't even be further from the truth. The experts say, no, cats are almost identical to one another when you're looking at their bone structures. You can line them up. You can line up the skulls even of every single cat species. And when you're even looking at the skulls, they're identical as well. There's more variety in human being skulls than there are between cat species skulls. So you talk about shooting yourself in the foot with that comment. He should have picked something else, honestly. He would have been better off picking like a deer.
I want to point out a fact too, is if you, and we've got it uploaded on this channel, Dr. Nathaniel Jensen versus Dr. Dennis Venema. And they go into the DNA differences that separate species, and how some species within the same kind that we would say exist within the same kind have more DNA differences separating them than humans and chimpanzees. So why don't we say humans and chimpanzees are the same kind? Well, if they understood the model and the predictions, as Dr. Nathaniel Jensen pointed out, we are not looking at just mere DNA differences. We are looking at what? Molecular clocks, right? We are looking at DNA function. So the amount of DNA differences, or the pattern of DNA differences, the nested hierarchical patterns, they can't really tell us what is and what isn't related. But molecular clocks, as well as DNA barcoding, DNA function, this is what could tell us. And that's why we see humans have low genetic diversity overall, while animals have greater diversity, which makes sense from the biblical starting point, because what does the Bible say in Genesis? God created two people, Adam and Eve. He didn't create just two of every kind of animal. He created populations of animals in fully functioning ecosystems. So right off the bat, we would predict that animals would have greater levels of genetic diversity than humans, who, since we started from 2, should have lower levels of genetic diversity. That's exactly what we find. So even if we did find a couple felid species within the felid family that had more differences than humans and chimpanzees, that's what we'd expect anyways from the starting point. And if the theistic evolutionists understand the Bible, we know we have the Tower of Babel event where we've got humans congregate in one spot. They don't follow God's command to spread out, but we have animals who did spread out. So we have humans who essentially have another lesser bottleneck at the Tower of Babel for however many years, once again reducing levels of genetic diversity. Point is, what we find in terms of DNA differences and genetic diversity in humans versus animals is exactly what we'd expect to find. But to actually identify what is and what isn't related, we've made predictions on DNA function, speciation rates, molecular clocks, and it's a great time to be a young Earth creationist, right, Matt? Because we see more and more every single day these predictions are being confirmed. What are your thoughts, brother?
Oh, I know. It's great too because they keep putting their foot in their mouth like this guy, right? Like trying to say, well, humans, how dare you say that we're not related to primates when we share more similarity with them based on morphology and bone structure than cats do. And then we look at cats and the experts are like, no, they're identical to one another. You're vastly different. You know, I mean, look at the bones in the hand. Look at we have a nasal bone. They don't have nose bones. We have foreheads. They don't have foreheads. I mean, the list is so big. That's why I made that chart, because there's vast amounts of different morphological differences and features between us. And then cats, again, not so much. There's even so genetically similar that you can remove the hair off of your house cat and put it on a lion and it will graph. You can take a lion and a tiger and breed them, and they'll make a liger. They're not different. They're completely related. I even made a prediction on exactly what cat was probably on the ark and what its mutation rate is and will be found to be, and that they're still increasing in genetic diversity. If deep time evolution is true, why aren't they maxed out in genetic diversity? Your mitochondria can only saturate with so many mutations before it's fully saturated, and then mutations don't show up anymore. They compile. It's like throwing garbage in your trash can. How much trash can you put in there before no more fits and it just starts falling out? Well, that's what your mitochondria is. It's building up with trash and mutations, and eventually it gets to the point where it's saturated. Well, guess what? It's not saturated. So not a lot of time has passed. It should be evident and very obvious and logical that if that's true, then what's going on? How fast are mutations accumulating? Well, that's fast. Well, that's really weird then. It can't be fast and not be full. Well, which one is it? Well, it's both. It's not, it's not full and they're fast. So I'm sorry. Evolution's just not true.